Liam's footsteps echoed through the nearly empty subway station. Midnight had come and gone. The fluorescent lights flickered with an unsettling rhythm, casting long shadows across the tiled walls. He checked his watch. 2:17 a.m. The last train would arrive in minutes. A chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the station's perpetual dampness. Something felt wrong. The air seemed thicker, more oppressive than usual, pressing against his skin like a cold, damp cloth. At the far end of the platform, a figure stood motionless. Liam squinted. Most late-night passengers were hunched, weary, seeking anonymity. This figure stood unnaturally straight, facing away from him. No movement, no breathing, just stillness. The electronic board flickered. Next train, 3 minutes. Liam shifted his weight, the sound of his shoes scraping against the floor unnaturally loud in the cavernous space. The figure didn't react. Not a twitch, not a turn. He remembered the stories his grandfather used to tell, urban legends about the old subway lines, about passengers who disappeared between stations. Liam had always dismissed them as nonsense, typical tall tales told to frighten children. But now something about the figure, seemingly so out of place in a way he couldn't quite explain, made his heart race. Slowly, impossibly slowly, the figure began to turn. Its face was wrong, not fundamentally incorrect, but somewhat off in a primal way that his eyes could not discern. Was it the too pale skin that reflected the light wrong, or eyes that seemed too unnaturally dark, like an endless pit? Liam wanted to look away. He couldn't. The figure smiled, not a warm human smile, a tear in reality that suggested something resembling a smile. The overhead speakers crackled, a burst of static, then a whisper so soft he thought he might have imagined it. The train's rumble approached. Wind began to whip through the station, carrying the scent of stale tunnels and something else. Something metallic, something old. Liam's legs felt frozen. The figure took a step forward, then another, moving with a jerking, unnatural gait that suggested movement without actual locomotion. "The train," Liam tried to say. No sound came out. Another step. Closer now. Close enough that Liam could see details he wished he couldn't. The figure's skin wasn't just pale, it was borderline translucent, like old paper. Veins and something darker moved beneath. The train rushed into the station, a metal beast emerging from darkness. Liam's survival instinct finally kicked in. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet. The figure was mere feet away now. The train doors opened with a hydraulic hiss. No passengers inside. Complete darkness. The figure raised one hand to its face, a long, too thin finger at its lips, as if to say they shared a deep, dark secret. Liam screamed, or tried to. Nothing came out. The train's interior lights flickered. He didn't dare board the train. He was trapped. The figure was inches from him now. Its hand reached out to touch Liam's shoulder. And then, Liam jerked away, a primal scream finally breaking free from his throat. The train's doors began to close, but the lights were on now, and Liam decided he would brave whatever is in there, then stay out there on the platform. He lunged forward, stumbling through the doorway, falling onto the train's floor. Behind him, the platform remained empty. No figure, no trace of what he'd seen. The train door hissed close and lurched forward. Liam's hands shook as he pulled himself up, pressing his back against the train's interior. The compartment was empty, completely empty. No other passengers, but it was no longer the hopeless emptiness he felt while on the platform. Just normal, sterile emptiness of a day's last train. Just the harsh fluorescent lights and the rhythmic rumble of wheels against tracks. When the train finally stopped at the next station, Liam ran. He didn't care who saw him, didn't care about looking foolish. He was glad there were people around at all to witness his foolishness. He ran until he was above ground, until cool, fresh air touched his skin, and the streetlights and car headlights grounded him that he was in the real world, until the cold, impossible memories of the subway platform began to feel like a nightmare. Still, he knew what he'd seen was real, and somewhere, deep in the city's underground arteries, something knew he had escaped. The next morning, transit workers would find nothing unusual, no sign of disturbance. Just another typical night on the subway system. Just another story Liam would never be able to fully explain. The surveillance room hummed with its usual late-night quiet. Peter adjusted his posture in the worn leather chair, eyes scanning the array of monitors displaying the airport's subway system's platforms and hallways. 12 screens, each a window into a different terminal, platform, and corridor. Camera 3 caught his attention first, a maintenance corridor. Something moved at the edge of the frame, too quick to identify. Peter rewound the footage. Nothing, just shadows and concrete. But he could have sworn he'd seen something thin and elongated, like a limb moving just beyond the camera's full view. He shifted focus to camera 7, the Terminal 2 platform. A woman in a red coat stood waiting, her back to the camera. Peter blinked. Her reflection in the station's tile wall didn't quite match her position, slightly offset, as if two images of her existed simultaneously. A logbook sat open beside him. For weeks, he'd been documenting these anomalies, small inconsistencies that made no sense. 11:43 p.m., camera 5, passenger's shadow doesn't align with body. 12:17 a.m., camera 9, figure appears in two subway car windows at once. 1:05 a.m. Camera 12, reflection shows different clothing than passenger wearing, each entry carefully noted, each observation meticulously documented. On camera 11, a maintenance worker walked down a tunnel. Peter watched his movements. Something was off. The worker's legs seemed to move differently on the left side of the frame compared to the right. Not a glitch. Something else. He zoomed in. The worker's shadow split, subtly, impossibly. A crackle from his radio, just for a moment. A sound like distant conversation, multiple voices overlapping. Peter spun toward the sound. Nothing. When he turned back, the maintenance worker was gone from the screen. Peter barely had time to breathe when another screen flickered. Camera 6, the emergency stairwell. A figure stood halfway up the stairs. Two figures, overlapping, one solid, one translucent. Peter's hand moved to the radio and stopped. The figure or figures had already disappeared from view. How exactly was he going to report this? But he was sure something was moving through the subway system. Not just moving, existing, in the spaces between moments, between perception, and it was getting closer. The next screen caught his attention. Camera 2, a service passage rarely used after midnight. Peter leaned closer. A maintenance cart sat in the center of the frame, its position unchanged for the past hour. But something was different. The cart's shadow seemed to pulse. Subtle movements, almost imperceptible, as if something was breathing beneath it, pushing against the concrete floor. He switched to the audio feed. Static crackled, then a whisper, multiple voices, overlapping, indistinct. Peter strained to listen. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. His logbook was filling up. Impossible observations. On camera 12, the Terminal 3 platform was empty. A figure stood at the far end, facing away. Multiple figures, overlapping, identical but not quite, like images seen through fractured glass. Peter's hands began to shake. He rubbed his eyes, thinking fatigue must be getting to him. He reached for his coffee. It had gone cold hours ago. The surface of the liquid rippled. No draft, no movement. Just a subtle vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Camera 5 went black, then camera 9, camera 2. One by one, the screens died, but not completely. Something moved in the darkness. Something was coming. The last screen flickered. Camera 7, the Terminal 2 platform. The image fragmented, then reformed. A figure stood impossibly close to the camera. Multiple figures, blending, merging. Peter's hand reached for the radio again. It vibrated. The static became a whisper. Voices. "They're here," someone said. Everyone said. And Peter dropped the radio as if it were scalding hot metal. The surveillance room temperature plummeted. and all the screens went black. Not black, something else. A depth that wasn't darkness. Peter let out a sound like a whimper, shaking uncontrollably now from head to toe. A sound came from the door behind him. He didn't turn, couldn't turn, because just then, the monitors erupted with movement. Figures, shadows, impossible geometries that folded into themselves. Peter felt his sanity slipping, become lightheaded with fear, then silence. Peter fainted. When the day shift arrived at 6 a.m., the surveillance room was perfectly normal. Monitors displayed their usual feeds. Coffee sat cold in a mug, but Peter was nowhere to be found. A logbook lay open, most pages blank. Only the last page showed anything. A single line written in a hand that was likely Peter's. "They're here." Emma had always considered herself observant. As a journalist, her career demanded attention to detail, the ability to notice what others missed. But nothing had ever unsettled her until she met the man on the C train. It began on a Tuesday in late October. The subway car was half empty, the harsh fluorescent lights casting a sickly glow on the tired commuters. Emma was reviewing her notes for an upcoming article, her laptop balanced precariously on her knees. That's when she first saw him, middle-aged, perhaps early 50s, wearing a gray suit that had seen better days. The fabric was slightly shiny at the elbows, the white shirt beneath slightly yellowed at the collar. He sat 3 rows down, perfectly still, staring straight ahead with an expression of absolute neutrality. Nothing remarkable, Emma thought, except for how unremarkable he seemed, and a single red carnation tucked in his suit pocket. The next night, same train, same time. Emma found herself scanning the car, her eyes drawn to his seat before she could stop herself. There he was, identical, same suit, same position, same blank stare, the red carnation. A coincidence, she told herself. Rush hour, people take the same routes. But something nagged at her, especially that bright red flower. By the third night, Emma was actively watching. She positioned herself strategically, pretending to be absorbed in her laptop while stealing glances. The man hadn't moved the entire ride. Not a twitch, not a blink. His hands rested on his lap, perfectly still, as if they'd been positioned by someone else. She began to document her observations, searching for discrepancies. There were none. It was as if he never moved at all, never left the train. Her friends thought she was becoming obsessed. "It's just some guy on the train," her best friend Donna had said over drinks one night. "You're reading too much into nothing. Even you're on the same train every day." But Emma knew something was off. She'd seen familiar faces on the train before. There used to be an old lady who always came in with a black Labrador in tow, and she would often be in the same compartment as Emma, but she was also sometimes in another. With her, it was natural, but with this man, it was not. On the 5th night, as if some higher power wanted to play with her, something changed. As the train lurched out from the stop, the man suddenly turned, slowly, mechanically. His eyes locked directly with hers. They were completely blank, no emotion, no recognition, just a flat, empty stare that seemed to look through her rather than at her. And when she looked down at the flower at his chest, a chill ran down her spine. The bright red carnation today was not the fresh, bright red it always was. Today it was old and withered, and for reasons she couldn't grasp, the image of that decaying flower scared Emma beyond anything. She stood up, suddenly desperate to move, to break the connection. The train was still moving, and people threw her looks as she pushed her way down the compartment. But she needed to get away, and all the while she could feel his eyes on her back. She didn't look back. The next day she began investigating, submitted requests to view city transit records. She scanned the employee database, just in case it was someone she was supposed to know. She found nothing. Her editor thought she was developing a story. "Interesting angle," he'd said. "The anonymity of city transit, the strangers we pass every day without knowing." But this wasn't about anonymity. This was about something else, something she couldn't explain. She started asking around, the train conductors, the transit police, the late-night staff. Nobody remembered seeing him. Nobody could confirm his existence. How could it be that she was the only one who noticed the same man on the train every day? Days turned into weeks, but the man never turned to look at her again. The man remained, always the same, always there, except for the flower. Now they were always withered and gray, a stark reminder that that day had not happened all in her head. Emma's sleep became fractured. Her work suffered. She found herself obsessively riding the C train, sometimes multiple times a day, searching for some explanation. And then, one night, he was gone. The seat was empty. No trace, no explanation. But she had her notes, her memories. Something had happened. Something she couldn't explain, and something else would soon happen. She could feel it, but all she could do was wait.